everybody. It is 12:30 on the dot, so we're going to go ahead and get started. This is the September monthly installment of Deep Dive with Altum, which is our webinar series where we just have great conversations with people all over the revenue cycle industry about, what's going on, what's on their mind, what's kind of hot topics at the moment. If you've never met me, I am Elizabeth Richards. I am the CEO of Altum Healthcare Solutions. And I have with me today, I'm very excited to introduce you to Ken Hogue. He is the Chief Revenue Officer at United Health Services. He was a top 40 under 40 Becker's National Recognized Healthcare Executive, a recently published writer, and a prior military veteran. You're going to find when listening to Ken, he is dedicated and compassionate healthcare executive who specializes in optimization and organization transformation to the industry's top 25% benchmarks while teaching and leading through servant leadership and data governance work priority models. I really enjoyed my pre-conversation with Ken and kind of his great new ideas that he has regarding the revenue cycle space. And so I'm going to turn it over to Ken if you want to introduce yourself. Anything else I didn't say? I know that one of the things that we kind of wanted to start with is, this chief revenue cycle thing is kind of a new thing. It's a new title. And so what does that mean? What does the chief revenue cycle do? And how has that impacted the way that you approach, your duties, your career, your staff, things like that?
Sure. Thank you, everybody, for having me. So first, I'm Ken Hogue, Chief Revenue Cycle Officer, as Elizabeth said, for United Health Services, which is in the New York Southern Tier area. And really, happy to be here today. But when we talk about the Chief Revenue Cycle Officer position and within organizations, I think really revenue cycle since the pandemic has happened in resetting and the challenges that we have with technology, data governance, as well as security are all things that we're faced on every day. But when you look at a traditional revenue cycle model for systems that have not been progressive or may try to work through all of these channels, what I'm seeing within the industry and our organization has done, and blessed to have them do so, is creating of the Chief Revenue Cycle Officer position. And what this really is it bridge gaps the traditional like finance and revenue cycle model of technology, people, finance, as well as community involvement. It really has a departmental chief to handle all of those different work streams, as well as sitting at the executive table, having those conversations that really need to be had. Sometimes they're crucial or advocating for resources and technology, but it allows for a single decision maker to be made across systems that may have several hospitals, markets, or within their divisions of revenue cycles. So that way it's kind of a balancing act between all divisions of healthcare system, vendor organization, or others. So within our organization, I'm responsible for complete revenue cycle from A to Z, as well as patient experience and community involvement partnerships. So not necessarily the key for those, but really leading those prioritizations and focus groups for how revenue cycle is the tool of marketing, financial stewardship for an organization, as well as patient experience and growing the footprint within our community. So I'm happy to be here this afternoon.
Yeah, great, Ken. I think one of the things I really enjoyed when we were discussing this, this presentation, what you were going to talk about was, your emphasis on revenue cycle as a community partner, as a partner for the patient, as a customer service backed thing. I mean, we've talked a lot about in RCM these days, we talk a lot about patient experience, but we don't necessarily always worry about the customer service aspect. I know you told me some things that you were doing at UPMS that were really focused on providing that additional extra customer service experience to the patient. So I would love if you told them, some stuff about that.
Sure. So, really, when we look within the patient experience arena, we need to think about what I would call a healthcare ecosystem, particularly if you're a fully integrated teaching facility, academic medical center, or those. Like, you have the interoperability of services that are both clinical, maybe teaching, research, or affiliated within universities. And when you really look at this, the market has changed within the last 3 to 4 years to where revenue cycle before, I think in a traditional model, may have been taught as how do they collect what an organization is owed, but more of an operating expense and not that refuel or energy that is a true engine of developing an organization and helping grow their footprint. So here at UHS, we have grown from about 775 million in 2019 of our net revenue. Today we are over 1.25 billion dollars and we are about 100 miles outside of New York City. But what we have done is utilize our instance of Epic and revenue cycle to build that footprint and really grow within the community that we serve. So by that, with the revenue cycle before traditional collections, capture, customer service. But when you look within these work streams, how do we then filter that all the way up to be like, with our organization, what is the likelihood within marketing from an organization to recommend your brand or your overall like health system for services? What services is your health system or organization bringing in? And from that, it's really a balancing act because in many parts of the country, profits are razor thin. And additionally, patients have choices now with telemedicine and other things that they never had before. So, to do that is where we have transformed our revenue cycle and optimized to really be that catalyst or that engine of how do we make sure that the patient has a great experience, both clinical and financial, but doing it utilizing two tools that we'll touch on a little bit more today and throughout the conversation. And that is really servant leadership and a concierge model, which basically minimizes the number of touches or interactions that you have to have with a patient when they've already identified those things that they need assistance with or those concerns. How do we take that and basically have that in a more patient friendly manner in order to grow the business? And by doing this, it's really monitoring a few things. Like if organizations or vendors may look at net promoter scores, or organizations that are health systems look at the likelihood to recommend for services. And we really have done this and moved everything in the right direction, going from a regional health system or community health system to an extremely large community health system that really has taken from a community approach to bringing world class technology, services, as well as integration of pharmacy within healthcare at UHS to the forefront of the patient and really focused on the community involvement of we want to provide services where the patients live or ourselves in the community that we all live, work, and serve, and really pulsing with communities as well and our backyard friends within the universities and other schools of what can we do better? What are we doing to drive those in efficiencies and gains, and having quarterly meetings or monthly committees really in focusing on prioritizing growing the business, but still providing a top quality service and patient experience in both clinical and financial. And then also listening to the things of, whatever work stream that they've come in through patient advocates, revenue cycle referrals, or traditional financial counseling and advocate services of what can we do better, and listening and coming up with a way to prioritize those to grow the business. And that's how we have really grown by over 20% our footprint within the community, and also taken our organization. We went live on Epic in 2020, and fast forward to 4 years, We are a top performing Epic revenue cycle organization in the top 25% of the country, to where our organization also has been recognized with 9 stars of Epic efficiency, and we've only been on Epic for 4 years. So a lot of work, but really doing it through 3 main tools and balancing that to be the catalyst of growing the business and looking at a business partner, as the revenue cycle internal is now becoming a part of that growth and benefits to our organization as well as our community. All right, so to get into, I think, a few additional things a little bit more here, and Elizabeth, if you've got questions or others, ask along. But really, by doing this, it was developed by hitting the reset button and ensuring that we deployed servant leadership. And from servant leadership, what that actually means is making sure that from the forefront, we're being respected, listened to, and also heard. And then from concerns that have come up or additional things that are obstacles, how do we synergize as a team in order to make those challenges become something that has a work plan or an initiative to drive results? And focusing on really those large items that need to move, that is the main barrier, and categorizing them within, is it a large rock item? Is it something that we know is a priority, but then you really need the larger item to move before you can really implement several of those changes? So, from the servant leadership, it's something that we have embedded across our entire organization, from clinical, financial, and also just a part of our culture. And we did that by making sure that leaders are rounding, listening to the concerns, coming up with an action plan, and really, as the chief revenue cycle officer for the revenue cycle, what are the challenges that my teams are having? How do I get some of the barriers out of the way? But then, two, how do we do so with empathy, understanding what staff may be going through, and some of the community challenges or fears that patients may be having, to prioritize those in order to come up within a work plan. And, the servant leadership approach, a lot of people hear that and is like, that's a lot of effort. It is, but then by doing so, it's coming up with things that have been identified, identifying them in, say, 5 to maybe 10 main work streams, and then really having those sub focus groups work on a line item of what those barriers are and really driving to those results. And by doing that, it's empowering your people, listening to the concerns that they're having day over day, and really taking that into consideration, and then from there, really developing an action plan in order to bridge gap some of the things that are causing some of the disengagement or frustrations that, be maybe done by the insurance companies or other challenges. Because as we know, revenue cycle changes every single month with an additional obstacle that has to be overcome quickly. So how do we balance that, but also how do we make our team feel heard and communicate it out? Because I think the number one thing that within revenue cycle is always a challenge. People may identify an issue, but they don't know where that work stream is in resolving that, or they may have brought it up multiple times. And if they don't really know that that is something that is being worked on or reviewed within the senior leadership plan, or, leadership chief groups of the revenue cycle, that's where your staff start to get disengaged. So, really, from that servant leadership, it's balancing the needs, what's been communicated, and really having a conversation and rolling up your sleeves to have a conversation, sometimes a crucial conversation of what those challenges are, to break them down instead of them becoming a barrier, coming up with what you can implement to move those obstacles. When we talk about as far as um, cultural change is in regards to sometimes driving uh, what is out there to move. And when we talk about a large culture change, we know change is very resistant for folks. And, what sometimes I think we hear, the obstacles that we have are not able to move because there is more resistance for those change than there may be in regards to driving a solution. So for that, it's really, to foster that culture change of revenue cycle becoming a key engine of an organization and growing their footprints, it's really, what does revenue cycle have to offer? How do you bridge gap uh, between revenue cycle, clinical, and some of the other barriers? And where do we come up with the solution? So to do that in, rounding and prioritizing, this was really done for our organization to where our staff have gone from a management, leadership approval and happy within the organization of the mid 80 percentile to over 92% is by getting to know what things are preventing them from feeling like there is success moving and in that direction. So for the culture change, once you have pulsed and come up with those issues, it's really focusing on one or two things and how do we move those and show that revenue cycle is able to partner either with a vendor solution or it may be bringing something in-house and really looking at what worked before. And then from there, what needs to be adjusted because we know that sometimes in revenue cycle, many things are a burning priority, but is it a true priority? And that's where when you start to put in parameters of data governance and work priority models of here's the defined charter, here's what we want to move, here's the barriers, and then how do we get people on board for that change is in order to move that. And it really takes a lot of effort from many parts of your team from the first conversation and then it's a few months of really having conversations and getting people on board but then hearing what those issues are and then you will start to see the results move very quickly once there's those defined roles of how do you benchmark it, how do you determine and quantify how large the issue is, and then once you start showing some of those successes, that's where then through the servant leadership of the staff feeling valued and heard, you're able to make the culture change for instead, revenue cycle may have made this mistake or, the redheaded stepchild, I think syndrome. Sometimes people feel that way within revenue cycle. You start to turn the situation and change it to the culture change to where now it's gone from revenue cycle needs to handle this and fast and why didn't they make these changes to being able to make that culture change to where they're like, let's consult with Ken and his team. They've brought issues forward. And from that, we're now able to say we've had a few success stories and change that culture because revenue cycle has helped through some of the complex changes that have been a barrier or not knowing on how to drive those results. And it's a partnership and an open conversation that needs to go back and forth.
Hey, Ken, this is Matt Curry with Altum. Just
Yep.
one question. The one thing that we've talked about in the past is more the personal growth as well, and your journey to get to where you are right now. I thought was very interesting. And as we go in and we talk with people on a daily, weekly, monthly, yearly basis, one of the struggles is always staffing and really, finding people that are passionate about the role and might not even know, how to go forward. Like what do you see out there, or what do you recommend from either like a mentorship, process, or just really just trying to make people aware that this could be a fantastic career if they want to follow the same path. And I think your story is interesting. If you wouldn't mind just hitting on that.
Sure. For me, I think, I grew up in a family that always achieved success coming from, my grandfather owning practice and working within the healthcare setting. Early on, I saw the challenges that doctors and medical staff had dealing with the administration side of insurance. And my path may be a little bit different than others. I knew that I needed to do something to make a change. Originally, I was like, is this being a lawyer? Is it working, within administration? And then for me, I really found myself within revenue cycle. And I found myself within revenue cycle because there were complex challenges. Many things were undefined barriers and changed, from month to month or quarter to quarter and year to year. There were so many regulation changes that it's like we need to make changes. We need to vet these and make them quickly because if not, then organizations struggle and providers can't provide the care that they need to. But for me, Matt, good question with the mentorship side. I was very fortunate early in my career for some of the other organizations that I worked for that really fostered in, revenue cycle is a career and what are those career channels and avenues. So when I came here to UHS in the midst of the pandemic, I started in March of 2020 and everything was changing. So it was how do I develop and how do I get to know my staff through both virtual and in-person interactions, and then really understanding when there may be conversation and things too, like who are the rock stars like on the team, who has their education and what do those career paths look like. So when we talk about the advancement, it really, I think revenue cycle has transformed from administrative services to it is a must within a healthcare system to have strong revenue cycle talent, both internal and external. But then, really, when you have folks that are hungry to learn and you see that particular like hunger and growth that someone wants, how do you keep them fully engaged? So, here within the organization, we have done that really by fostering relationships with those colleges and talking to individuals and organizations about what finance is. Because when you tap revenue cycle, what I will say is people within the finance industry sometimes think healthcare financing is accounting, forecasting, and things like that. When you talk within revenue cycle, it can range from audit, technology, compliance, regulations. And then when you really have a strong team, how do you then develop those career paths to move from, say, an analyst to a manager, or from an analyst to a project manager? Because you need to ask the questions as well. Do you want to monitor as far or build out the system, or do you want to help people grow? And I think when you talk about those career avenues, it's really making sure that leaders, if they are a true people person, are positioned to kind of be the committee or the investment of growing your entire team. So, from a leadership side of what I have come up through the ranks, like I started early on in my career as an analyst in the IT side, and then went to operations as a manager, went back in the consulting world more to IT. And then I was like, I know that I'm a people person. I love to have conversations and communicate with people and break through the challenges. So for me in my career side, I was like, I knew that I needed to have the people functions, the finance side, as well as the IT side in order to get to where I wanted to be. And never did I think, at 40 years old, would I be sitting as a chief revenue cycle officer? That was a goal that I'm like, let me try to stretch and be there before I retire. And now rethinking some of those goals. But for our team, it's really seeing those people that have the 1-2 step approach. And what I mean by that is, do they have the skill set of going 2 steps up in a technical ladder? And then you also have to ask, when you're looking at your footprint of your staff and growing them, do they also communicate well with customers, clients, patients, and leadership? And if that's the case, then looking at having a conversation with that staff of what are your career aspirations? What are your 3-year, 5-year plan? And I can tell you, since coming to UHS and within the organization, There were initially 15 people out of a team of about 300. And so when I first came, that I'm like, I see potential, and how do I have monthly meetings, even 30 minutes of getting to know these people and grow? And many of those people today, 4 years later, have gone from out of college as an analyst to now 5 years later, they're some of our project managers within the organization and have gone back to got their project management certification. And they're like, I never knew that revenue cycle had these opportunities. So it's really how do we advocate what is out there in revenue cycle and what is needed? Because we're going from follow-up phone calls to a lot more technical and legal and compliance than we ever have been before. So that's where, as the market changes and adjusts, we have to as well for organization.
Awesome, Ken. So, I wanted to apologize because in the middle of that, my WebEx just completely crashed. So I'm just very glad to find out that it did not take everyone else down, with me, and that you were still able to continue to talk. But I apologize if you were like, where did Elizabeth go? And I also realized that I incorrectly said UPMC, which was your previous work in, employer, and you work at UHS. So I want to apologize for that as well. But
No problem.
I think that, you know, your insight is so valuable in this industry, and I think anybody who's willing to be a forward thinker and to try to do it a little bit different is what's actually going to move the needle on healthcare revenue cycle. I want to be cognizant of the time, but is there anybody in the audience that has a question for Ken?
I just had a quick one. Ken, watching the debate the other night, I know how healthcare got brought up. I kind of wanted to get your opinion from being on the provider side and seeing the amount of growth that you've been able to do there, where you see healthcare, more specifically revenue cycle, going within the next 12 to 24 months, and how some of our hospital partners can best prepare for that.
Sure. So for me, I think it's really to know like where the pain points are and where the risks are associated to revenue cycle, right? It's making sure that we have the key metrics on what bottom line profitability is, as well as, the key metrics for over 90, your days in AR, and then your unbilled. And coming up with guardrails that are at an enterprise level, but then also at a payer level in financial class. Because when you look within the change that's happening, and Matt, you brought up a really good point, is you know, you're seeing the managed care side of things in terms of Medicare and Medicaid make changes that honestly, you're sometimes asking yourself, how can we implement this in 90 days? There's 17 different things that need to change. You need to have buy-in from the front office and, the back end part of your system in making those changes. So to me, it's really knowing those risk areas and knowing to where there's kind of an uncomfort zone within the organization. And how do you open up those channels to say, like, what are patients concerned about? And what are your staff concerned about? As well as, the provider group as well. So when you talk about a large health system and provider group, many of the providers are like, we're seeing reimbursement models more challenged. Documentation, we're documenting more than ever. But then, two, it's taking away from some of that patient related care. So that's really where I think, quarterly, or even, if there's a lot of changes going, a monthly touch point that involves both clinical, rev cycle, and finance is needed, because you need to have those focus groups or governance structures in place to know what's being combated. Because as soon as you start hearing of those changes, then there needs to be an action plan already underway or being digested for the work that needs to be done to have the trust that's there. Because I think things are moving so quickly that it also takes time to operationalize those. So no one can do it alone, or an organization. And that's where you really have to have the partnership and start today of the communications of what's happening and be able to quantify those shortfalls or challenges and then speak of them and really know what is going on within your payer land and looking at individually your payers by the actual product typed as well, not just necessarily is this, Blue Cross and what is going on in Blue Cross, like what's going on with each product line, because one thing gets better and another thing you see a barrier, and that's where you really need to make sure that you're kind of like watching that strategically so your team is successful in the organization.
Awesome. Well, I really enjoyed this conversation today, Ken. Thank you so much for agreeing to come on and have this conversation with us. I can't wait to get it up on the website so that more people can benefit from what we discussed today. We have our next deep dive with Altum coming up on October 11th with Tyler Sanders, who's the director of PFS at St. Joe's Candler Health System in Savannah, Georgia. So make sure that you join us for that. And otherwise, I hope everyone has a wonderful weekend.
All right. Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Stay safe.
you.